Pete Buttigieg is here. He has been mayor of South Bend, Indiana since 2012. He is one of America's youngest mayors and is seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party. The Washington Post has called him the most interesting mayor you have never heard of. I am pleased to have Mayor Pete come to this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you.
There are people who call you Mayor Pete rather than Buttigieg.
That's generally what they call me around South Bend.
It's a bit easier. Yeah. Born in South Bend?
I was, yeah. My father came over to the U.S. from Malta and met my mother, and they both got jobs at Notre Dame a little bit before I came onto the scene, and grew up in a neighborhood in South Bend.
What kind of jobs?
They were at Notre Dame teaching. Father's in English, my mother's in linguistics. And we got started in a nice working-class neighborhood on the northwest side of town that I later came to understand was unusual, and that I didn't realize that having a lot of vacant and abandoned factories around you was something that didn't happen in every city. It was only when I left for college that I realized that. But even though our city had a lot of struggles as a town that had really lost its company that was a company town when Studebaker closed in the 1960s, it was also a great place to grow up, and it's a great community today.
How big?
We're just over 100,000, which doesn't include the University of Notre Dame. It's just outside city limits. I like to say it means we're just big enough to matter, just big enough that you taste complexity and have all the issues, but small enough that you can innovate, you can be creative, you can try different solutions, and then if you find one, we're also typical enough that a lot of other cities might be able to use them.
I want to come back to this, but after you were mayor, you found something you could do with all those empty buildings, did you not?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, on the housing front, we had a lot of vacant and abandoned houses that simply had to come down, but a lot that could be saved. On the industrial front, we've got, as I speak, we've got an almost million-square-foot Studebaker factory that's finding new life as a mixed-use technology center, harnessing the fact that a lot of fiber optic cable passes through our community, and taking advantage of the access to electrical power that really is a legacy of the factory days.
Went to Harvard?
I did, yeah.
And then went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar?
That's right.
Was it straight right out of college? You went directly to Oxford?
No, I had 1 year working on, I worked on the Kerry campaign, so that was about half a year. And that was in 2004. That was the first thing I did right after I graduated. They sent me to Arizona, and then we realized that wasn't going to happen, and they redeployed me to New Mexico. I learned a ton, and then went to Washington working for my old boss, and then the following summer the Rhodes kicked in and gave me the chance to spend 2 years in the UK.
What did you get out of that?
A lot. It was a very intense program. I was in the PPE program, so philosophy, politics, and economics, and learned a whole different style of learning that they practice at Oxford. But
now, how is that? What do they do that's different?
Well, they have this tutorial system, and Harvard had tutorials too, so I thought I knew what that meant. But over there, it's more like a weekly oral exam, and I was getting grilled, especially on economics and in things that I was racing to catch up on. But that economics background has served me very well coming back to a place like South Bend, especially with the unemployment rate in the double digits when I took office as mayor.
When did you get the political bug, some might say?
You know, I was always politically aware. My parents talked about politics a lot. We weren't politically connected, or even politically involved necessarily locally, but I was always aware. And I went to a Catholic high school. I'm Episcopalian, but went to a Catholic high school that talked a lot about social justice, too. I learned what was happening around the world. I remember I had an Old Testament teacher who passed around pictures of golf courses in Arizona and told us that whole rivers had been diverted, and there were villages in Mexico unable to get water, so that there were these golf courses. And to him, this was a proof that hell must exist, because where else would you put the person who built those golf courses? So there's always that sense of social justice that I grew up with, and I think over time that developed into a political sense too.
When you look at South Bend, is it buffeted by the winds of change that are in the world today?
Absolutely.
Whether it's populism, whether it's facing up to what technology does to jobs and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a company, a city that really grew around a handful of companies, and you would have a single employer that might account for 10, 20 or more thousand jobs, and that simply doesn't work anymore. It doesn't mean we're done manufacturing, but what we've had to do as a city is adapt to the fact that jobs are going to come fewer at a time. If I'm going to have 10,000 people working in manufacturing, it'll be 100 people at 100 companies each. rather than having them all in one. We're dealing with all of those different things, from trade to automation, that have changed the nature of work, the nature of the economy. But we've also adapted with the times, and I think that's one of the reasons, just a few years after we were listed as a dying city in one national publication, that now the city's growing. We're seeing our fastest population growth. Well, a few things. First of all, the city realized that nostalgia wasn't going to work. We couldn't just turn back the clock. We engaged our universities in new ways. We have these great colleges and universities. And they had typically,
more than one?
Sure, you've got St. Mary's and Holy Cross College, and IU has a campus there, all in South Bend or near South Bend. And we've engaged them in new ways. I think we have a chance to redefine what it means to be a college town or a university community. I'm part of an effort called the Metro Lab Network, that is a network of city-university pairs across the country. And what we're trying to do is take the substance, the intellect of what the faculty and the students are working on, and apply it in the life of the city. We've got environmental engineering students, for example, from the University of Notre Dame, working with students in the local community college and high school students in one of the most economically challenged neighborhoods in the city to remediate a polluted underground river. And in the process, they're learning a lot about the human factor, and we're getting the benefit of some free labor.
Bill Gates used to say often, need to put a lot of IQ on that problem. It seems like if you've got a great university there, you've got a lot of IQ that you can use.
Absolutely, but I think talent's not enough, and what we're trying to do is be a place where talent meets purpose. I think that's the real stuff of the partnerships that we have with partners like Notre Dame. Well, I think a mission-driven university, which is certainly true of the ones in our midst, understands that it really needs to apply the intellect to things that matter, whether it's making low-income neighborhoods better off or making sure that the community like ours has a future. They've even established a physical presence in underprivileged neighborhoods, like a Center for Arts and Culture on the traditionally industrial west side of town. I think these are exactly the kinds of connections that universities and cities need to continue to develop in order to create jobs and create a more secure quality of life for the future. A lot of people knowing only of Notre Dame might not realize that we're a city that's 40% minority, 28% below the federal poverty line, and really needs all the help we can get.
Minority meaning primarily African-American?
We're about a quarter African-American.
Or?
We have a fast-growing Latino population as well. It's not unlike some neighborhoods you might see in a place like Chicago, where what was originally largely a Polish neighborhood is now Latino. So you still have large Catholic immigrant working families, but 2 generations later, they're more likely to be speaking Spanish than Polish.
America's economic future will be shaped in part by technology, a lot by technology. And it raises the question of automation and robots. Robots are showing the capacity to do a lot of things, both on the assembly line and in homes. What does that mean for work and the dignity of work? But work for most people, I think, if they have a good job, if they have a job that they find both satisfaction and compensation, gives them something that they're proud of. It gives them a place. It gives them a sense of being. It gives them the capacity to do things for those that they love.
That's absolutely right, and I think that's also why jobs with similar pay and similar benefits still aren't necessarily interchangeable. Sometimes I think we, maybe well-meaning progressives, talk about retraining as though it were simple to take a worker who's spent maybe 20 years building his identity in one kind of job and suddenly tell him that, hey, if you go through this training program, you can swap out for this other one that's in a different field. And he may not see himself that way. And so we've got to understand that when we're looking at the unemployment rate as though it's the only thing that matters, that we've got to worry not only about the income that goes along with that job, but the identity that comes with it and the security, how it relates to the future. And the more that automation changes the nature of work, the more I think we're going to find that people will be looking for work with meaning that is also secure and has the right kind of income. Because there's a lot more to work than a paycheck.
Is there going to be a lot of jobs with meaning for people?
Well, I think there can be. I mean, the happy ending of the automation story would be if more and more of our economic and productive activity shifts to work that we absolutely need more people signing up to do, whether it's in public service. I've got a shortage of people applying to be police officers in our city. Teaching, we can't expand pre-kindergarten education the way we want to without getting more qualified teachers. A lot of deeply meaningful jobs. But of course, they have to be compensated for and invested in and built up in the right way. But if machines become more and more productive, then the value of labor working with machines will continue to change. And while in theory it could be a beautiful thing if very few of us have to work in order to make stuff, that only makes sense over the long run. And as Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. We've got to figure out what to do in the next 10 and 20 and 50 years.
In terms of national politics, did you support Bernie Sanders or did you support Hillary Clinton?
I supported Hillary Clinton. I worked very hard to do what I could to get her elected in the general election against Donald Trump. I also, when I was a high school student, noticed Bernie Sanders. Actually, at the time, I was looking for a subject to write an essay for the Profiles in Courage essay contest, and he was kind of I won with this essay that I wrote about then Congressman Sanders. So I've always admired him as well. And
because he was a socialist, or because he said what he meant. He meant what he said, and a democratic socialist.
While being very clear in his political values, he was actually pretty successful in working with people across the aisle. And I think that's a message that certainly has played out in my lifetime. Whether you look at Paul Wellstone, who votes against the Iraq War on the eve of his reelection in a state where the war is popular. He takes an unpopular stand, and somehow his approval goes up. And frankly, I think the same was true of George W. Bush as well, who had a line that he used to say. I remember this from working on the Kerry campaign. George W. Bush used to say with devastating effect, "You always know where I stand." And he said it in a way that suggested you couldn't say the same of his opponent. And even people who might not have agreed with him were inclined to support somebody who they thought was guided by conviction.
Does Trump have that, you think, or not?
No, because it's very difficult to know what his convictions are. His positions routinely change. He doesn't have an ideology. He has a style.
But at the same time, I mean, those argue who support him. I don't have to agree with him, but I believe he's a strong guy, and he'll do what he thinks.
Well, I think that's part of why he gets support. People look at him and they just get the sense that, there's somebody who...
He's prepared to disrupt, for example.
Well, that's certainly true.
Yeah,
unfortunately, a lot of people are being disrupted in ways that aren't so welcome. And if he had gotten his way in taking health care away from millions of Americans, many of them working-class people in communities like mine, I think they would have realized that the disruption was happening on their backs.
Medicaid expansion was a principal issue of the Obama plan. In Ohio and in Indiana. What did they do in Indiana?
So Indiana got a waiver and created the Healthy Indiana Plan 2.0, which is basically a Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. It's actually one of the signature achievements of Governor Mike Pence.
That's what I asked him, who was governor when this happened.
Yeah, and the idea that now he's doing everything he can to destroy what would have been one of his legitimate achievements is a great, it's very representative of some of the changes that I guess people are willing to make when they get into power, but it's terribly unfortunate for people in Indiana.
In the way you think about political issues, what has influenced you most? Is it your education? Is it the community? Is it what?
I guess two things. One is a sense of history and studying all the changes that the U.S. has gone through and how we've come out stronger for them. If somebody says we've never been this polarized before, you can think about the Civil War, and the fact that half this country broke off, and we still got through that. If you think about the tumult now, you can think about how we came through the 1960s. And the other thing is, yes, community. It's where I grew up. It's home. Being from a place that reminds me constantly that all the things that are being talked about in politics in Washington, they don't matter because of what's happening among the politicians. They matter because of what will eventually happen to us in communities like South Bend as a consequence of what those politicians do. And I think that in particular for my party, the Democratic Party, to be more politically effective, we're going to need to reorient our vocabulary to putting people going through their lives back at the center of gravity, back at the center of all the stories we tell, and recognize that the politics matters because of what it does to people, not the other way around.
Therefore, has the Democratic Party missed an opportunity, or have they failed so far to really define a narrative for the times that we live in? Let's assume, from 2014 to the present time.
Yeah, I think we've struggled to articulate.
We don't know where the Democrats stand. We know there's division and fighting within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, which is really unfortunate because the Democratic message has never been more timely. The Democratic message, in my view, is that we exist to defend and support ordinary people going through their lives. And that's never been more important, because right now there are a lot of people, in my view, in power, especially in Congress, who are doing a lot of things that will hurt ordinary Americans going through their lives. Not just taking away health care, but taking away restrictions on financial institutions.
And to what are they attributing that to? What is it that compels them to say, you know, while I might believe it, is it economic? Is it ideology? Is it an ideological fix on the way things should work? Is it
among the Republicans? You mean?
Yeah.
In my view, it's a very narrow conception of freedom. Freedom from government is the only kind of freedom they can imagine. Now, freedom from overbearing government is very important. That's why we have a Constitution. The reason we have a Constitution is to restrict the government from encroaching on our freedom. But the reason we have a government is to restrict anything else from encroaching on our freedom. And they're blind to that. It's this huge blind spot. I don't doubt that conservative friends of mine are sincere when they say they care about freedom. But in my own experience, freedom has been enhanced by being able to get access to medical care, being able to marry who you love, being able to find out what the gobbledygook that comes in from your credit card company actually means. Any of that. Yeah, I mean, that's a freedom that Democratic policies have tended to enhance. Yet Democrats have grown, I think, out of practice in talking about freedom.
In politics, and you would know this from your Oxford education as well, I assume, I mean, how you use language is crucial.
Absolutely. It's narrative. It's the story that you tell. The story has to be true.
And the words that you own.
Sure.
You know.
And yet we've allowed words like freedom to be taken away from us.
Or security.
Or security, or fairness. Fairness, it's particularly strange, knowing the history and the tradition of the Democratic Party, that fairness has kind of been stolen from us as a piece of vocabulary. And yet if you look at certainly the themes of the Trump campaign, I mean, that was really about making some people feel that they were being treated unfairly. And then, in my view, taking advantage of that in ways that are ironically going to make them even worse off.
I have lots of friends who went from undergraduate school to Rhodes scholarships and then came back and went to law school. How did you escape that?
Well, I think by then I was beginning to realize I wanted to be closer to home. I got a job in business with McKinsey Consulting, right. And they didn't have a South Bend office, but they had a Chicago office. It got me a little closer to home.
And you wanted to be at home?
I knew I wanted to come back to the Midwest.
But did you want to go back to the Midwest so you could run for political office, which is exactly what Barack Obama did?
You know, if you'd asked me when I was a student thinking about whether I would ever run for office, I never would have guessed I'd wind up running for local office.
Why, you didn't seem like the type, or what?
Well, I might have run for office, but I didn't understand that state and local office was so important. The thing that actually triggered my first run for office, which was a very unsuccessful race for state treasurer in 2010.
Unsuccessful, you lost.
I got clobbered. Yeah. I didn't just lose. But what had happened was Richard Murdoch, who was then the state treasurer of Indiana, used his standing as state treasurer to try to stop the Obama administration from saving the auto industry. This is in Indiana. If you go through Kokomo, Indiana, you see a factory on the right and a factory on the left, and you know that they would have been absolutely devastated, beyond a chance of ever coming back.
Is it true with Gary as well? Or?
Similar. Gary was more steel, right, Kokomo was more auto, but it was the same kind of dependency. And having grown up in a town where I could see, I mean, in South Bend growing up, a lot of the older factories have come down now, but it literally is as if a war or a natural disaster had struck our city. That's what it physically looked like. And so I knew what it meant if you destroy the biggest employer in a community. And here I saw one of our own elected officials trying to do that because he was mad at the president and didn't like that the auto workers got too good of a deal. Anyway, I ran against him, I got clobbered.
But you learned something.
I learned all kinds of things. I learned retail politics. I went to 89 counties around the state of Indiana, and you know, as a bit of an introvert, I found myself interrupting people enjoying their tenderloin sandwiches at the county fair and sticking out my hand and introducing myself and telling them why I thought they ought to vote for me for state treasurer.
While they're eating.
Yeah, I was on hand for the world record for the most fried chicken ever assembled in a single serving. They put it in a canoe to make the Canoe Fest more interesting in Franklin County. I learned that side of politics, and I learned the disciplines of it. Yeah, to my surprise, I enjoyed many of the most grueling parts.
I know people that have gone into politics too, and I think Mayor Bloomberg may be one of them who, because you're here at a conference of mayors sponsored by the Mayor's Philanthropy, it is that people get into it and they're not necessarily, they're relatively shy. They have never been somebody who wanted to be at the center of attention, but there's something about it.
There is.
That once you get past something, you know, you find out you enjoy it. You enjoy the human contact. You enjoy the opportunity to talk. You enjoy the community.
Yeah, it's just that. It's the way you have to extend yourself in order to understand other people, and the way you learn to listen to other people and see perspectives other than your own. It's so rewarding. And then when you win, I mean, when I won and became the mayor, then the rewards are even more extraordinary, especially in your hometown. I mean, having a chance to shape a community that you grew up in and watch it grow and watch it begin to believe in itself again. Was so rewarding. I mean, I enjoyed consulting. I worked with great people in the business world. I learned a lot. It paid well. But there were moments where I would think to myself, I don't care.
Something missing? Oh, you don't care about what...
I mean, I cared about doing a good job.
Yeah, exactly.
But I didn't fundamentally care about, a pricing issue that I might have been working on. The way I know that, the work I do as mayor, whether it's, fire and police or economic development or even parks and recreation, it isn't important because a client's paying me to care about it. It's important because it just matters, because people's lives will be worse if we don't get it right.
So it gives value to your own life.
Absolutely, it gives you meaning. Now, that can be hazardous for people in politics, because if you have a meaningful job, there's always the risk that meaning in your life will come from your job. And any elected job has to be one you're willing to give up in order to do the right thing.
Suppose someone, you're what, 35 now?
Yes.
Suppose someone comes to you and says, look, you're a smart guy, and you know politics at the local level, and you know what people think. You're not looking at it from 30,000 feet. Tell me what it is that a candidate for president in 2017 needs to know in order to have a real chance at resonating. What is it they have to do? What do they have to put together?
I think you need to help people understand where they belong in the future in ways they can relate to. And if you get it right, it'll be very unifying, because the desire for belonging is the same, and the desire for a sense of the future is the same whether you're talking about a blue-collar auto worker in South Bend who wants to know that there will be a job in 10 years, or a transgender kid in high school who just has to go to the bathroom like everybody else. It should be something that brings us together. We got to talk about it in those terms. Most people, I encounter people who I'm convinced their lives literally depend on things like the healthcare reform that's being talked about, especially in rural counties, but also in a place like South Bend, where there's a lot of folks who rely on Medicaid. And yet they may not know the name of any Congress member in particular. And so they may not care some of the things that those of us who closely watch the game, the show, have to say. They often will, because it's so immediate. Even people of very modest education, I find, are very sophisticated when it comes to knowing what I'm up to, because it's going to affect them. You can't miss the impact that a city has on your life if you ever throw out trash, walk on a sidewalk, or visit a park.
Do people in South Bend, Indiana, care about foreign policy?
Well, of course we care. People know it's important, and but I think more than anything we care about it through the lens of how it's going to affect us, whether it's a question of how it's going to affect people we care about who are in the military, or in terms of our ability to continue growing. If there's a trade war, what would that mean for the many companies in my community that are part of a global supply chain and create a lot of jobs? So I think people care for one of two reasons, or both. One, morally, right? Our moral leadership. And two, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my job, my family, my loved one in the military?
If you abandon this treaty or that treaty, what impact does the trade have on whether my company does well or bad?
Which could be quite a lot in a place like the industrial Midwest.
Right. The issue of being a gay man, has it ever been a factor in your political conversation?
Not really. Occasionally maybe on the fringes, but what I found, and I should say that I was already in office. I came out during a re-election campaign. We didn't know what effect it was going to have, but in the end, it became clear that most people didn't care.
They
just
already knew you, didn't they?
Yeah, and maybe that made a difference.
I would think so.
I'd like to think that I'll live to see the day when this doesn't even matter. I mean, straight people don't have to come out.
Exactly.
Why should gay people? And you show up at some charity function and your date is the same gender, and everybody's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I knew, at least in Indiana, that wasn't an option.
You said
for
you'd
me.
like to see a day. How far away are we from that day?
I think in some parts of the U.S. we may already be there, but not in Indiana. I'm just a few miles away from that pizza place that made headlines for announcing that they wouldn't cater a gay wedding. And a lot of people were snickering at the idea that a gay wedding would get catered with pizza anyway. But there's that symbolic story that played out in our county. And of course, we had some of Mike Pence's activism when he was governor on this issue. We've got a long way to go before we can get to where it's just another feature of who people are, not something that's a distraction from how good of a job you can do.
You've gotten lots of attention as it, there's articles who say, the best young mayor you don't know, or the most interesting young mayor you don't know. So there's a lot of that. They have built into you, in terms of the profile they have of you, we expect great things from him. Is that good?
There's an old joke about the definition of a Rhodes Scholar is somebody with a very bright future behind you.
That's great.
What I've learned is I've got a job to do, and I enjoy engaging in broader conversations because I care about the country and I care about the party. I care about growing and meeting peers, which is why I came to New York to participate in a program with other mayors. But at the end of the day, my job is at home, and what matters is whether things are going well. If I'm filling in the holes in the road and helping to grow the economy, then I think nothing else matters. And if I fail at that, then nothing else matters.
It's great to see you. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.